So many of you probably have this chart. I see that the chart is lying around on the tables of the kings and prophets of Israel and Judah, which of course is the title of this series of studies. And the area that we're going to focus on in this particular study, as you can see there enclosed by that red line, we're going to have a look at this early part of the history of the two kingdoms. Last evening we considered how the kingdom was to be divided, and today we're going to see how that happened and the players involved, the individuals involved. And of course the very important thing about this study of the kings of Israel and Judah is that destinies were being sealed in the decisions that were made by the kings of Israel and Judah. Not only their own destiny, but the destinies of others for whom they were responsible. And so the lesson that we should take out of this is that all of us have obligations, and whether that be in ecclesial leadership, some of us in this room are in that role, whether that be in the leadership of our home, many of us in this room are in that role, or whether it be our involvement amongst young people as leaders or teachers, whatever it may be, all of us have some kind of obligations to lead and guide and give examples to others. In doing that, we are, of course, setting our own ultimate destiny, and we're influencing the destiny of others. That's what the record of Kings and Chronicles is about. The outcomes, and we've been reading that in our readings, haven't we, in Ezekiel? The outcomes, the ultimate outcomes, came about because of the leadership, whether that be good or bad. Most of it was bad. The destinies of people were resolved by that leadership. So we need to take this lesson from our study and go away with a determination to be the kind of leader that the good kings, and there were very few of them, the good kings of Judah, like the one we read about in our readings this morning, King Josiah. Wouldn't it be marvellous when Christ came if he said, you know what? You were like Josiah in your zeal for the things of your God. You were like Josiah. Wouldn't that be terrific? I don't think we want him to say, you were like Jehoiakim or even Jehoahaz. Did you notice that Jehoahaz, who was the younger brother, was actually put on the throne before his older brother? I wonder why the people did that. Well, because Jehoiakim was an absolute rotter. He was a terrible man. And the people put the younger brother on the throne before they put the older brother. And so there are, just in what we read, we see the importance of leadership in the things of our God. So this is the area we're going to focus on in this first study. And one of the men we're going to meet, of course, is the son of Solomon, Rehoboam. His name, as you can see, means, its primary root, Rechab, means to broaden, and Am, which is the last couple of letters of the name, Am, a people. To broaden a people, or as those that think they know say, the name means a people has enlarged. Now, of course, that's a misnomer, isn't it? The Oxford Dictionary of this name says, who has enlarged a people. Well, of course, the exact opposite occurred, didn't it? Rehoboam lost the kingdom. He lost 10 tribes. He didn't enlarge the kingdom. He lost 10/12 of it to Jeroboam by his foolishness. Now, he came to the throne at age 41, so you'd expect him to be a little mature by 41. You get to 40, and you ought to be, because it's over the other side of the hill, brethren, all right? You're going down the other side of the hill. If you don't have some kind of maturity by 40, you're not likely to get it. So he should have been mature. But we're going to see what caused this man's problems. He died at age 58, which is pretty young, not as young as Josiah, who died at 39, taken away by God himself. But, you don't necessarily have 70 years or 80 years or 90 years to get it right. You might only have 58 or 39. And in our case, because we believe Christ is coming, for most of you it's not going to even be 39, is it? So, we need to make sure we get it right in the time that we've got. His mother was an Ammonitess. Now, there might be a little clue to the problem that this man had, the characteristics that he brought into the role of king. His mother was an Ammonitess. Her name means, Naamah, means pleasantness. And the fact that Rehoboam's mother was an Ammonitess is twice stated in the record. So it appears as though there's an emphasis on this fact. Twice God deems it necessary to say that his mother was an Ammonitess. And of course we know Deuteronomy 23 verse 3 says that a Moabite and an Ammonite should not enter into the congregation of Yahweh to the 10th generation unless they had the faith of Ruth, which this woman probably didn't have. Okay? They shouldn't enter the congregation. There's a hint to one of the factors that contributed to the apostasy of Rehoboam. And he was contemporary, of course, with Jeroboam, the king of Israel to the north. So this is a little bit of a summary of Rehoboam. Now this is what we wrote in the King's Notes many years ago about this man. You know, the heading of this slide is The Silver Spoon, Rehoboam. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Is that a saying you use in North America? Yeah, because it's an English type thing, isn't it? You know, the silver spoon in the mouth. You know, he's hand fed from babyhood. By the time he's 40, he's still being silver spooned. He's never learnt to be his own man, so to speak. He's never learnt the things of life that can only come from the rough and tumble of life. He's never gone through that experience. He's never had the experience of the ordinary common people. He has no understanding of what their life is like. This is the problem with Rehoboam. So this epithet that we use, the epithet is Rehoboam the Indiscreet, points to the leading characteristic of the son of Solomon who presided over the division of the kingdom of Israel. He was born 1 year before Solomon ascended the throne and grew up knowing nothing but the prosperity, peace and opulence of his father's reign. This fact undoubtedly contributed to his lack of character development, his indiscretion, and his pronounced lack of sympathy for the common people. So this is the summary that we gave to this man. You get a bit of a feel from that of the character of Rehoboam. When we come to the story, you'll see that this is how he behaved. We also call him in this slide the relaxed Rehoboam, because he had a very relaxed attitude to the things of God. His apostasy of 2 Chronicles 12, we might just have a very quick look at that. 2 Chronicles chapter 12, verses 1 to 12, without reading the whole text. He was an apostate at heart. So here in the record of 2 Chronicles chapter 12, and at verse 1, we read, And it came to pass, when Rehoboam had established the kingdom and had strengthened himself, he forsook the law of Yahweh and all Israel with him. Do you notice it says, all Israel with him? You know why it says that? Well, you see, what happened was that when Jeroboam established his apostasy in the north, a lot of people in the north decided that this was no longer the place to be. Regardless of the fact that they had an inheritance from Yahweh that was permanent, they decided that this was not the place to be. So they came in their droves from the north, especially the Levites and the priests who had been rejected because Jeroboam had his own priesthood from among the whole range of the people. All right, so they said, well, this is not for us. We're getting out of here. So they packed up and left their inheritance and found somewhere to live in Judah. So Judah to the south became a collage of all the 12 tribes. And so it's called here all Israel, all right, because Rehoboam was now reigning over members of all tribes of the nation. But it goes on to talk about the way in which he apostatized and God sent Shishak against him. So here is the man who was very relaxed when it came to the things of God. There was this period of rapid growth that is recorded for us. If you have a look at 2 Chronicles 11, verses 13 to 17, verse 13 of 2 Chronicles 11 says, And the priests and the Levites that were in all Israel resorted to him out of all of their coasts. For the Levites left their suburbs and their possession and came to Judah and Jerusalem. For Jeroboam and his sons had cast them off from executing the priest office unto Yahweh. And he ordained him priests for the high places and for the demons, or the goat idols, as the word means, and for the calves which he had made. So this is what caused this exodus from the north to the south. Now, Rehoboam had a golden opportunity, didn't he? You think about this. If this happened in our day, and people who, their ecclesia or ecclesias were in a bad way, in bad shape, they said, well, we've got to go somewhere for our family, for our kids. And they go to another ecclesia. The ecclesia that they decide to go to has a golden opportunity to help growth and development, to steer these people in a good direction. He lost it. He did not use that opportunity. He was far too relaxed. Silver spoon. Life was too easy. And so this was the problem with Rehoboam. In verse 13 we just read, priests and Levites and all Israel resorted to him, and that is rendered by Rehoboam. They took their stand with him. They came because they thought there were good things in Judah, and there were, and they wanted to take their stand with Rehoboam in Judah. He let them down. His leadership failed. In 2 Chronicles 12 verse 1 we read the words, he strengthened himself because it was growing in the 3 years of this record up to this point, but it produced arrogance, and he and all Israel forsook Yahweh. What a tragedy that is. A lost opportunity. But he had certain wisdom. Have a look at 2 Chronicles 11 verse 23. There was a certain, smartness about Rehoboam. We read in 2 Chronicles 11 verse 23, he dealt wisely and dispersed all his children throughout all the countries of Judah and Benjamin unto every fenced city, and he gave them victual in abundance, and he desired many wives. And when it says here he dealt wisely, the Hebrew word means, it has the idea of making a decision, separating something mentally and understanding and making a decision on the basis of that understanding. And of course he did this for the sake of his own preservation. He had many wives, and therefore he had many children, and as they grew up under him, he said, well, there's a bit of competition going on in the family here. What am I going to do about this? Well, I'll put Johnny over in that place, and he can sort of build up his own little empire, and he'll leave me alone. And I'll put Freddie over here, and he can build up his little empire. See, he was street smart, and he kept problems out of his own family by dealing in that way. He was shrewd in that way. He dispersed all of his children, and the purpose was to disseminate his presence throughout the land and avoid strife in a large and diverse family. But then it says he desired many wives. So like Solomon, in defiance of Deuteronomy 17 and verse 17, he was playing with fire. And of course, it had some unfortunate results, as we'll see as we proceed in our studies. So there's Rehoboam. Now, you know the story of what happened in the record of Kings as to how the kingdom was divided. So let's come back to 1 Kings chapter 12. 1 Kings 12, and we see what happens here in verse 1. So let's just finish off Rehoboam by seeing how the kingdom is divided. In verse 1, Rehoboam went to Shechem. Shechem, of course, was the place where decisions were made. That's the place where Abraham first came, at least the first note of where Abraham came, into the land of Canaan, Shechem. And we know the history of Shechem. It was here, of course, Jacob made some very important decisions. It was here that Joshua brought all of Israel at the end of his life. It was here that the Lord Jesus Christ converted the woman of Samaria. Decisions, important decisions are made at Shechem. You know what Shechem means? Anyone know what Shechem means? The shoulder, all right? What do you do with the shoulder? Not so much today, but in the old days, that's what you used to lift. You put the yoke on your shoulders. It became the symbol of responsibility, of lifting responsibilities. Okay, so this is the place of decision making. So the whole nation comes to Shechem. A decision has to be made. This is the moment of truth for Rehoboam. He's just come to the throne. And of course we know what happens. Jeroboam, who had fled to Egypt because Solomon was pursuing him to kill him, he returns when he hears of the death of Solomon, And of course, he gets around and he generates the spirit of discontent among the people. And so they come along and they say, well, look, the taxation, in terms not only of what we have to pay out of our wages, but the taxation of labour is too great. Well, of course, God had warned them about that, hadn't he? In 1 Samuel chapter 8, he said, watch out. This is the nature of kings. They want big palaces, they want good, lovely food and clothing. Guess where they're going to get it? From your labour. Watch out. Now they're complaining about it, because it's happened. And so we have the record of how they come and say, look, if you lighten the taxation burden, we will serve you. And Rehoboam turns initially to the men who had been the counsellors of his father. And he says, well, what would you do? And they sensibly say, now listen, this people's under a lot of pressure. If you release some of that pressure, they will serve you. You will be their king. He says, you're kidding me, aren't you? So he goes to his mates, who have grown up with him, all with silver spoons in their mouths too. No comprehension of what is happening in the nation. No idea what's happening in the ecclesia. And so they say, look, why don't you go out and tell them that if you thought my father was tough, wait until you see me. All right? And we know the story. There's this revolt. Jeroboam leads that revolt, and the nation is divided, exactly as Yahweh had said through Abijah the Shilonite. Okay, so this is what you know the story very well. And so I think there's some lessons that come out of that. There's good reason, brethren and young men, to go to those in your ecclesia that you know are reliable, the older folk, the older brethren, and sisters at times, okay, to go to them and seek counsel when there are important decisions to be made in your life. Ask them, what would you do? Don't just make decisions on the basis of your own feelings at the time, or those around you who may not necessarily have the wisdom. There's good counsel in what we see here in the record of Rehoboam. He should have taken the advice of the older brethren with whom he had first consulted. So then, the kingdom is divided. So we now come to have a look at Jeroboam, because not only was Rehoboam at the crossroads, Jeroboam finds himself almost immediately at the same kind of crossroad. What is he going to do? And the record of 1 Kings 12 and verse 25 tells us what he does. You get a bit of a feel for what we have to do in this study? I can't take you through verse by verse through all of those. It'd be terrific, isn't it? But we'd need about 3 years to do it. And it took me 2 years to get through this study back in 1974, 75, when I knew nothing about it. Okay, so it is a huge study. So I'm going to have to be selective, just selective, and dig into the things that we think are really important. And this is one of them. In 1 Kings 12:25, it says, then Jeroboam built Shechem in Mount Ephraim. So Shechem, what is it? The place of decisions, critical decisions about responsibility, okay? He built Shechem in Mount Ephraim, which of course means double fruit. There should have been fruit out of this place from good, sound decisions. But it wasn't to come, it wasn't to be. Of course, Ephraim becomes political, and the decisions that are made on the basis of politics, not on the basis of principle. Never let that happen in ecclesial life. Never, ever make decisions on the basis of politics. I'm not talking about the politics of Donald Trump and that crowd, okay? I'm talking about politics in the brotherhood. And if you don't think there's politics in the brotherhood, you're not looking. Because there is. Decisions are made on the basis of politics, not principle. And that's what happens here. And we've got to learn that lesson. So it goes on to say in verse 25, he went out from thence and built Peniel. Peniel? Where does that take us? It takes us back to Genesis 32, to the place where Jacob was taught that success would not come through his own contrivings. He tried to save himself, didn't he? And God showed him as the angel touched his thigh and at right angles, and he's holding it on his thigh. He can't catch up with his family. That's in the hands of God. He's told not to rely upon his own strength, his own machinations to save himself from trouble. He had to cast himself entirely upon Yahweh in the hour of his need. And of course, that's the wonderful message of Hosea 12, verses 3 and 4. Jeroboam did the exact opposite here at Peniel. Peniel, that's a bit different than Peniel. Shouldn't go on these digressions, but we can't help it. Do you know why? There's a difference between Peniel and Peniel, two names mentioned in Genesis 32. Peniel in the Hebrew means, I have seen God. Peniel means, they shall see God. Okay, so it's talking about you and me. The lesson that Jacob was taught at Peniel when he looked into the face of the angel, I have seen God, was not meant just for him. Hosea 12 tells us that there God spake with us. When Jacob came to Bethel for the second time, there he spake with us. Peniel means they shall see God. This is a lesson for all who would come after Jacob. Okay, so this is the pressure that's now on Jeroboam. Look what he does, verse 26. And Jeroboam said in his heart, he doesn't say this to anybody else, he says it in his heart. And this is where decisions are made, isn't it? This is where we make decisions. In our heart. Anybody got a definition of the human heart? When the Bible speaks of the heart, what does it mean? It doesn't mean the thing that pumps blood around your body, does it? What does the heart mean?
Kidneys.
Well, that kidneys is the reins, isn't it? That's what purifies the blood. We're talking about the heart here. Well, I'll tell you what. Sorry.
Inner motivation.
Yes. Brother Carter has got a wonderful definition of the heart in his writings. He says, and this is well worth writing down, he says, the heart is the deeper part of the mind where character is formed. I think that is a perfect definition of what the Bible means when it talks about the heart. The heart is the deeper part of the mind where character is formed. And so when we see Jeroboam here saying in his heart, he's making decisions about direction. And this is going to change the destiny not only of Jeroboam, but of multitudes of people thereafter. Not just in his generation, because how often do you read of the kings that followed him in all their diversity, that they followed in the way of Jeroboam who made Israel to sin. This decision was to determine the destiny of millions of God's people. So it's very, very important. And it was a political decision. And it was not based on the faith that he should have had in the declarations that have been made to him by God himself, that I will look after you, I will confirm your kingdom. Leave it to me, Jeroboam. I know it's humanly impossible to you, but leave it to me, and I will get you through it. He doesn't leave it to God. He says this in verse 26. Now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. Why? Well, because 3 times in a year, every male has to go up to Jerusalem. That's where Rehoboam is sitting upon the throne of David. They're going to go up there and they're going to say, well, why don't we just serve Rehoboam? That's the way his mind is thinking. You see, God has said, no, that's not going to happen. You leave that to me. In verse 27, he says, in his heart, if this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord. You know, we're given an index to Jeroboam's thinking. Who was their Lord? These people of the 10 tribes of the north. Who was their Lord? Well, Jeroboam, by divine decree. God had said, you'll rule over all that your heart desires. He was their Lord. But you see, in his mind, he's saying, no. They will go, they want to return unto their Lord. It's an indication. Indication he doesn't have either faith or confidence in the promise that God had made. He's looking at this purely from a political perspective and the way that human beings normally operate. So what's he going to do about it? He says, they'll return unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they shall kill me. Kill me? And go again to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So what does he do? He takes two calves, and made them of gold, and said unto them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. There's a lot of things going on here in the mind of Jeroboam, as we're going to see. So viewed from a human standpoint, it was true that his kingdom could not be secured if people went up to Jerusalem 3 times in a year. He himself should have gone, shouldn't he? He's a male, isn't he? Every male shall appear before me 3 times in a year. He should have gone with the confidence that God would preserve him from the machinations of Rehoboam. That's tough, isn't it? I mean, it's tough, but that's what faith is about. And his faith is tested, and he fails. We're all tested at times by situations not dissimilar. Choices have to be made that determine our destinies. Unto their Lord, this illuminating statement of where his mind was. He was their Lord, as Yahweh said in 1 Kings 11:35 and 37. So he takes counsel with himself, makes these 2 calves of gold, and of course our mind goes straight back to Exodus 32 verse 4, because that's what Aaron did in the wilderness. He made a golden calf, probably after the pattern of Hathor, the cow god, goddess of Egypt. Maybe it could have had some similarity to Apis, the bull god of Egypt. Egyptians of course worshipped the whole panorama of creatures, large and small. So there was definitely that, because where has Jeroboam just come from? Egypt. He spent the last years of Solomon's reign in Egypt. He's been influenced by that. But there are clear political overtones in his choice of the calf or the ox, because the ox was the symbol for the tribe of Ephraim. Right? And of course, Jeroboam was an Ephraimite. So there's human pride in this as well. This is a very careful selection of animal to make an idol of. And then he says this to his people: it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Every Israelite had to appear 3 times before Yahweh, Deuteronomy 16 verse 16. But you see, that was effort, wasn't it? To leave behind your family. If you were going up by yourself, we know that Joseph and Mary went up every year in the 12 years of the Lord's life before he was in the temple. You remember the story we've just read in Luke? Okay, so most families did this, and it was a sacrifice. They didn't have air-conditioned motor vehicles, to drive the distance from Seattle to Camp Delaney. It's probably somewhere about the same distance. Think about that, all right? 3 times in a year, every season. So whether it's hot or cold, you had to go. So it was not an easy thing to do. So he says, come on, I think the truth makes too many demands on us. It is too much for you to go up there. I will establish this golden calf here in Bethel, and you can all just, halve the journey, or less than half the journey, and just worship here. So it's a very smart appeal to the laziness of human nature. And we read this in the record, verse 29. And he set the one in Bethel, the house of God, and the other he put in Dan, judgment. Interesting, isn't it? Now, Bethel was situated on the boundary of Jeroboam's kingdom, so when people were going down, this place was right in their path. You know where Bethel is? It's actually on the high ground that runs from the north to the south. This is where Abraham came, all right? He came from Shechem to Bethel. It's on the backbone of what the scripture calls the mountains of Israel. This is the access road. And we've been there just recently, and you look over one side, you've got Ai, and down over here, just sort of as you get off the side of the road, there's a little eminence, Bethel. And you can see both of these places from that high ground, from the road that Israel has built down the backbone of the mountains of Israel. By the way, the Palestinians are not allowed to use it. So it's just for Israelis to drive on. But it's an interesting place to go. So it was north of Jerusalem, in the territory of Benjamin, strategically placed on the way to Jerusalem. And of course we know the significant history of this place from Genesis 12 verse 8 and from 28 verses 11 to 19. But then it says he put the other in Dan, or judgment, the home of Israel's first apostasy. Isn't that interesting? This is where in Judges chapter 18, the Danites, who can't take their inheritance from the Canaanites and the Philistines and others, decide that, at least some of them decided, 600 of them, they would go north to Dan. They'd been spied out by 5 of their number. All right, they said, well, we can take this place, and it's a place, it's far from anyone. There's no magistrate in the land. There's no one to tell us what to do. So they took the gods of Micah, an Ephraimite, and his priest, who happened to be the grandson of Moses, and they thought they had it made, didn't they? The grandson of Moses as their priest. And they established Israel's first apostasy in this town of Dan. By the way, it's one of the most magnificent places in the whole land of Israel. I'm often asked, where would you live today if you had to live in Israel? I'd say Dan. It's full of water. Unbelievable place. So you've got to see it to believe it. It's a wonderful place. I can understand why they said we want this place. But it was the home of the first apostasy of Israel. Now there's something very important in this record here before us. Something extremely important, because the next verse, verse 30, says this. And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. Now there's a map. I haven't put the arrows on here, but here is the tribe of Benjamin. This is Bethel. Okay. Here is Jerusalem down here. Bethel is not that far north. Where is Dan? Right up there. Get an idea of the distance? Yeah. This thing became a sin because the people of Israel, the northern kingdom, didn't go in droves to Bethel. They went in droves to Dan. It's 3 or 4 times the distance from where most of them lived. A long, long way from where most of them lived. Now, isn't that so typical of human nature? If you make provision for it, and you say, well, look, it's too much for you to go to all the meetings. You know, too much for you to be involved in ecclesia. Look, God doesn't require all that stuff. Here, we'll make it easy for you. We'll put a little place of worship next door. So you can just walk out the door and there it is. You don't have to go to Jerusalem. It became a sin. They didn't go there. They didn't go in the direction of Jerusalem, which was just across the border. They went way up north. It'd taken days to get there on foot. Think about that. It's the way human nature operates. You make ecclesial life easy for people, I'll tell you what they'll do. They'll be all over the continent. They'll go to extraordinary lengths to use the time and the opportunities that you have given them. So we need to learn that lesson. That's what happened in the days of Jeroboam. You know, we sometimes complain about the pace of ecclesial life. I'm sure it's the same in your area as it is in ours. I mean, you listen to the announcement and you think, good grief, how are we going to do all that? There's always something going on, isn't there? It's pressure. And you think, oh, wouldn't it be terrific if we could just sort of back off for a while and have a bit of a rest? Guess what human nature does? Yeah, it does this. It'll find something else to do that is 3 or 4 times more difficult than keeping up with the pace of ecclesial life. It's one of the important lessons that comes out of Jeroboam. So don't complain about the announcements which they're made on Sunday morning. It's good for us. It really is. Oh, I do have arrows there, look at that. Isn't that amazing? So you get the idea? I'd forgotten I had my arrows there. So it's pointing out the distances involved here and the reason why it became a sin for the people to worship in Dan. Well, I'd love to say more about Jeroboam, but we will do that, God willing, later on today when we come to have a look at 1 Kings 13, because you cannot really get a handle on 1 Kings 13 unless you connect it with the end of 1 Kings 12. And you'll see just by reading the last few verses of 1 Kings 12 that you just ignore the chapter breaker, because it's not there in the original text, of course, and read straight through, because here is Jeroboam operating as his own high priest. And it's while he's inaugurating his system with all of these jerks standing around him, the priests from the lower order of the people, anybody who came along and said, I want to be a priest, I'll pay an ox or whatever, you can be a priest. They could be ignoramuses, all right, but they could be priests. Well, it's at that point that the man of God from Judah bursts in upon the scene. So you have to connect the end of chapter 12 with chapter 13. When we come to do our workshop later on, we'll look at that. So let's move on to the next king amongst the wreckers. Not the reformers, the wreckers. We've had a look at Rehoboam, we've had a brief look at Jeroboam. What about Abijah? Well, we call him the belligerent one. And he's belligerent. When you look at the record of this man, that's his characteristic. And I want to just point out one thing about him. Basically, his name, Abijah, he's the son of Rehoboam, means Yah is his father. That, again, is a misnomer. Yah was not his father in the spiritual sense. Rehoboam was his father in the spiritual sense. He reigns only for 3 years, but in that 3 years he punches a few people in the nose. Right? He's a belligerent character. His mother is Maacah, who's going to play a very important part in events to come. She is the one that King Asa removes because of her idolatry. So you get a bit of a feel of the background of Abijah. But he is a classic Judaizer, this man. He thinks that he's got it all worked out. And so he goes up and he tries to take the kingdom back from Jeroboam, and he claims that Judah is standing for the things of God, when in fact there was all this corruption going on underneath. So he's blind and he's a hypocrite. That's the character of this man. But there's a key to his life. There's a key to understanding why he was like this. Brethren and young men, we're all the products of environment. Family environment, ecclesial environment, we're all the products of environment. It's true, isn't it? I mean, the way that I talk is a product of my environment. Why do people have an Australian accent? Why do people have a North American accent? Well, because that's what you grow up in. We're all products of our environment. And so was this man. Have a look at 1 Kings 15 and verse 6. It says this. This is the story of Abijah. And if you just cast your eye to verse 3 of this chapter, just to introduce verse 6, it says, he walked in all the sins of his father, Rehoboam, which he had done before him, and his heart was not perfect with Yahweh his God. Now, can I get you to answer that? What does that mean? From those who were here last night, what does it mean that his heart was not perfect? Yeah, so you need to relate verse 3 to verses 12 and 13 of this chapter. So in my Bible there's a red line drawn between those words in verse 3. His heart was not perfect. Over to verses 12 and 13. Because verses 12 and 13 tell you he took away the Sodomites out of the land and removed all the this is the work of Asa, by the way. He took away the idols that his fathers had made, and Maacah, his mother, his grandmother, he removed her from being queen. See, so this is the work of King Asa following Abijah. So it's a reference to what Abijah was doing. So we know what that means. It means he had turned away to false gods, worshipped, and of course probably taught by his own mother. Now, let's look at verse 6. This is the key to Abijah's life. And there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. You got that? What's that about? Well, it's telling you that as a child he grew up in the environment of contention and warfare. That's all he knew. So when his family sat down at the meal table at night, the discussion was around the battles that were going on in the brotherhood. They were talking about this battle and that battle, about things to do with warfare in the ecclesial world, and how they don't like that brother, and don't like this brother, and I hate him. That's the environment he grew up in. You want your kids to be like Abijah, then make that the topic of conversation around the meal table and not something positive. All right? Because that's what your kids will grow up with. They'll grow up aggressive. They'll grow up thinking that this is what life is about. It's about warfare. All right? So that's why that record says that. There was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. That's all he knew. So he becomes what? Abijah, the belligerent one. He wants to punch Jeroboam in the nose. He wants to take back the kingdom by force when Yahweh said you can't do it. Right? This is the character of Abijah. Now you probably can read the story, the full story for yourself. But verse 7 goes on to say this. Now the rest of the acts of Abijah or Abijah and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And look what it then says. And there was war between Abijah and Jeroboam. Surprise, surprise. This is the way the guy's grown up. So he simply carries on from his childhood. And there's war between him and Jeroboam for the 3 years of his reign. So he was a very belligerent character who took the war boldly to Jeroboam to recover the 10 tribes, even though he was outnumbered 2-1. And of course, Yahweh intervenes on the behalf of Judah because he wasn't going to support Jeroboam, was he? Even though Judah was partly corrupt, he wasn't going to support Jeroboam. So he does help Judah. He helps them to survive. And they scrape through by the skin of their teeth. Have a look at 2 Chronicles 13 verse 8. This is the speech of Abijah on Mount Zemaraim. This gives you a bit of a feel for the hypocrisy of this man. We've just seen what's going on in Judah. We've seen that his mother Maacah is an idolater. And now he stands up in 2 Chronicles chapter 13. We read in verse 3 that Abijah set the battle in array with an army of valiant men. So he's gone out to war against Israel. He wants to recover the 10 tribes with 400,000 chosen men. Verse 4. And Abijah stood upon Mount Zemaraim, which is in Mount Ephraim, and said, Hear me, thou Jeroboam and all Israel. Ought ye not to know that Yahweh God of Israel gave the kingdom over Israel to David forever, even to him and to his sons by a covenant of salt? Well, he's got that right. But of course, he's not recognising what God said to Jeroboam, that he would secure his kingdom as he would David's. But look at verse 8. You come down to that verse, he says, And now ye think to withstand the kingdom of Yahweh in the hand of the sons of David. And ye be a great multitude, and there are with you golden calves, which Jeroboam made you for gods. Have ye not cast out the priests of Yahweh? So he points to Israel's idolatry, to the total exclusion of Judah's own glaring weaknesses in that area. He was blind to the idolatry that was going on, that he himself was involved in. And so the idolatry and the apathy that had set in and the laxity that had set in Judah, that had been carried over from Rehoboam's reign, he had done nothing to eradicate. That's the sad tragedy of the life of Abijah. He was a wrecker. He was not a reformer. He was a wrecker. So I want to turn now to two reformers. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on Asa and Jehoshaphat in this series. I know this is sort of like, pretty quick, but it has to be quick. We're not going to get through all these kings without being fairly cursory when we consider some of them. But this man we do want to pause briefly and have a look at, King Asa of Judah. It's important to recognise the meaning of his name, because it's got a part to play at the end of his life. His name means physician, and you go to a physician if you want to be healed. And this man becomes the first reformer, and I'll make this statement, and you can challenge me if you like, but I know I can knock you over, alright? You can challenge me if you like. Asa is Judah's greatest reformer. Greater than Hezekiah, greater than Josiah. Alright? I'll make that statement and we'll endeavour to prove it to you. He is their greatest reformer in their entire history, and most importantly, he's their first. It's always hardest to be first, isn't it? You're an example to follow, fine. He had none except that of David, his father, his forefather. He was a wonderful man. Sadly, brothers and sisters, if I read the record correctly, we're not going to see him in the kingdom. That is the tragedy of this man's life. We are most likely not going to see him in the kingdom. Because at the end of his life, his faith failed and he never recovered himself. That is the tragedy. Now, there's a lot of lessons to be learned. You can get in there and be a reformer, but unless you can maintain that through your life, it's no good to you. It's Ezekiel 18, isn't it? Ezekiel 18 says if you turn from away, you might have spent decades in faithful service. But if at the end of the day you turn away, all of that is forgotten. It's not going to be mentioned to you. All the good's not going to be mentioned to you. You will be condemned at the judgment seat. That's the way God works, and it's just and right that it be so. And so this is the sad story of King Asa of Judah. He reigns for 41 years, which is a lengthy time. His mother's name is given as Maacah, but in fact she was his grandmother. Alright? She had an influence upon the kingdom, an enormous influence on the kingdom, as we're going to see. She was the mother of Abijah, this Maacah, and the wife of Rehoboam. So the obscurity of Asa's mother may be due to the dominant position enjoyed by Maacah, as she's described. Remember that description? She's queen. He removed her from being queen. That title actually means the principal lady. She's the most dominant female force in Judah at that time. Rehoboam's favourite wife, an idolater, an Ammonitess. Okay, so you get a bit of a picture where this man had come from, his origins, and of course he rises above that. Now there are some significant references about King Asa, and here's one of them. 2 Chronicles 21 and verse 12. You in 2 Chronicles? 2 Chronicles 21 verse 12 tells us something about him. This is a letter written by Elijah the prophet somewhere between 12 and 15 years after he was removed from the presence of Elisha. You recall the record of 2 Kings chapter 2, where the chariots of fire divided them, and Elijah is taken up into heaven by a whirlwind. Chariots, of course, remain with Elisha. Elijah's taken away. Now, where's he put? Well, he's clearly put back in where he came from Gilead, because he writes a letter to Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat. And it's recorded here for us. So you get a bit of a clue about how God felt about this man as he's writing this letter through Elijah the prophet, sending it to Jehoram, a wicked king, the son of Jehoshaphat. You read this in 2 Chronicles 21 verse 12. And there came a writing to him, to Jehoram, from Elijah the prophet, saying, Thus saith Yahweh God of David thy father, because thou hast not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat thy father, nor in the ways of Asa, king of Judah, but hast walked in the way of the kings of Israel, then condemnation is going to come upon you. And it did, terribly. he ended up with dysentery. His bowels fell out by reason of his sickness. We might have a brief mention of that later on. So this is an important reference, isn't it? Because it shows you what God thought about King Asa. Jehoshaphat and that. These are the reformers of Judah. These are the ones who tried to turn the nation around. And in Asa's case, and in Jehoshaphat's case, they both succeeded. And he was on the throne for 41 years, and so he has a number of contemporaries in the north. Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha, who assassinated the son of Jeroboam. Elah, Omri, we're going to see a very dominant character in the history of Israel, very, very important character, and his son Ahab, of course, who brought Nimrod worship into Israel. We're going to see all of those kings in our study. So this is through the reign of Asa. Now, we mentioned this last night, but I think it may be worth having a look at. Let's come back to chapter 15 of 2 Chronicles, chapter 15 and verse 17. Really would love to spend some time with King Asa, and I don't know that we can do too much of that. We are going to look briefly at some of the important things in his life, but just have a look at this passage here in verse 17 of 2 Chronicles 15. Just step back to verse 16 for the connection. And also concerning Maacah, the mother of Asa, it should read as the margin in my Bible has it, the grandmother of Asa, the king. He removed her from being principal lady because she had made an idol. There's that word in the Hebrew, Miphleseth, means a terror or a cause of trembling. Rotherham says she had made a monstrous thing. Can I just pause here and mention something that was mentioned here this morning in the readings? I don't know what your experience is, but if you have been exposed at all to some of the terrible things that are available on the internet, and if you are a Christadelphian that loves the truth, what was your experience? I'll tell you what mine was. I started to tremble. I started to tremble. My conscience is telling me something. And the horrible things make me tremble. Is that your experience? If you're not trembling, there's a problem. And you see, what this is telling us is that the imagery here, and I won't go into the details, but it's, if I was to suggest to you the shape of the idols, just your imagination can work that one out, okay? And so the record says, the Hebrew says, that Asa removed his grandmother's idol in that awful shape, which was a cause of trembling. It was a monstrous thing. She'd made this cause of trembling in the Asherah. You know what Asherah is? Yeah, it's where they worshipped with immoral rites. They had women there and others for immoral purposes. Get a bit of a feel for this? See what this man is about? Yeah. He wants to get rid of that kind of corruption from the ecclesia and from individual lives. He stamped it and he burnt it at the brook Kidron. But the high places were not taken away out of Israel. Nevertheless, the heart of Asa was perfect all his days. But when you read on, he fails. His faith wanes. He makes the foolish decision of creating a league with the king of Syria to save himself from Baasha, the king of Israel, who's trying to block the border and try and reduce the influence of Jerusalem. So he goes to the king of Syria. And the prophet comes along and says, "What are you doing?" And he locks the prophet up in the stocks. He refuses to listen. And he dies that way. All right? But the record says that his heart was perfect all his days. There is your proof. Proof positive that word, that phrase means he never turned away to false gods. Oh yes, he lost his faith, but he never turned away to false gods. That's at least something positive can be said about him. But I don't think he's going to be in the kingdom, brothers. And that's going to be terribly, terribly sad. There'll be a lot of people that were there who were the beneficiaries of Asa's reforms, who, when he died, paid due honour to him for what he had done for them. And that's another lesson we can learn from this. It's one of the tragedies of our ecclesial experience in the latter days, that we've had brethren to whom we have looked as mentors and teachers who have failed us, failed their God. Now, thankfully, many of them have recovered themselves. But that's happened to us, hasn't it? What do you do with these brethren? Do you do what some Christadelphians have done? They've taken the books that have been written by these brethren and burned them? No. I happen to have a mentor who messed up big time. I still honour him for what he did for me. It wasn't for his teaching and his influence, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I acknowledge that fact. Thankfully, he's recovered himself. But that's the realities of what we're reading here. This is not some story. This is about our ecclesial life. This is in the record because it happens to us. And we must learn the lessons from it. And his people honoured him. They made a great burning for him. That doesn't mean they cremated him, by the way. Some people think that means they cremated him. No. I want to show you later on that Jehoram, that king we've just been looking at, where the letter came to from Elijah, it says they made no burning for him. You're going to cremate anybody, you'd cremate him, because his bowels fell out by reason of his sickness. They made no burning for him. But they did honour King Asa for what he had done for them. So I said that word Shalem is the root of Solomon's name. And by contrast, Solomon's heart was not perfect with Yahweh his God, as was the heart of David his father, for he recognised false gods. It means, as we've said, that though he lost his faith and trust in Yahweh at the end of his life, he never turned away to worship or recognise strange gods. Now, let's have a quick look at the... Wow, I've been talking for 57 minutes. I'm going to keep going for a while, Tim. It's all right? You happy with that? Okay. 2 phases to Asa's life. This is the graphic way the scripture presents a picture of this man. Now, he's attacked by Zerah the Ethiopian, who has an army of 1 million men. There's no way that he can face that. I mean, he's got a reasonable sort of army, but he can't face that. Okay? So he's got to put his trust in Yahweh, and that's the record of 2 Chronicles 14. And he says in verse 11, Asa cried unto Yahweh his God and said, it is nothing with thee to help with many or with few. And he says at the end of verse 11, he says, we rest on thee. Now here's a little word that you can follow up in your own time. See that word rest there in verse 11 of 2 Chronicles 14? It is the word shayan, S-H-A-A-N. It means to support oneself or to lean upon. It's used again in chapter 16 in verses 7 and 8 3 times. Okay? Verse 7 of chapter 16 says, and at that time Hanani, this is after he's made his league with the king of Syria, Hanani the seer came to Asa king of Judah and said unto him, because thou hast relied, there's our word, all right, same word as rest, because thou hast relied on the king of Syria, and not relied, there it is again, on Yahweh thy God, therefore is the host of the king of Syria escaped out of thine hand. Were not the Ethiopians and the Lubims the 1 million strong army that was defeated by the intervention of Yahweh? A huge host with many chariots and horsemen, yet because thou didst rely, there's our word, you leaned on Yahweh, he delivered them into thine hand. Okay, so here was a man who had absolute confidence and faith that God could save him from his enemies, and he did. But look what happens after the battle and after they've taken the spoil. In the record of 2 Chronicles 14 and verse 15, they smote also the tents of cattle, and they carried away sheep and camels in abundance and returned to Jerusalem. You reckon there was only sheep and camels? Don't you reckon there'd be oxen and some other kind of animals like asses? Of course there were. It wasn't just sheep and camels. So why does the record say just sheep and camels? Well, because it's about the two phases of King Asa's life. The early phase and the latter phase. And we see this in the characteristics of sheep and camels. Sheep hearkened to the shepherd's voice as Asa did to Yahweh's prophet in chapter 15 verse 8, introduced the greatest reformation in Judah's history. We'll try and come to that later on. The camel, of course, is notoriously self-willed and give the appearance of disinterest in receiving command. Have you ever seen a camel? Well, they chew the cud, but they walk in the way. They don't care less than anybody. Very relaxed. Self-willed. The sheep depend on the shepherd to lead to still waters and green pastures like Asa did in his early years. The camel is self-reliant. Can go a week without the water of the word. Can lose up to 1/3 of its body weight in water and survive. If man loses 1/8 of his body weight in water, he dies. So here's a Christadelphian that doesn't need the word. He's quite happy. He doesn't need the word. Sheep are submissive and trusting as Asa was. We rest on thee, he said in his prayer. Camels are complacent and self-reliant, as Asa became in his final years. You know, when his feet were struck, because he put the feet of God's prophet in the stocks. That's what the Hebrew word means. He locked up God's prophet in the stocks. He stopped him from going around teaching the word. So what does God do? Strikes him in his feet, because his walk is corrupt. And it says in the record, in his distress, have a look at verse 12 of chapter 16, 2 Chronicles 16:12. Asa in his 39th year of his reign was diseased in his feet until his disease was exceeding great. Yet in his disease he sought not to Yahweh, but to the physicians. What does he name me? Physician. Self-reliance. Okay? Tragic. Sheep was a clean animal under the law offered in sacrifice. It represented Asa in the first half of his reign. Camels were unclean under the law because they chewed the cud, chewed the word, so to speak, that didn't affect their walk. Their feet were corrupt, so to speak. Right? Unclean feet, like Asa at the end of his life. But you know, even though he dies tragically and they make a great burning for him to honour him for what he had done to them, he was to be followed by a son who was to follow in the early steps of his father and to be another great reformer in Judah's history. So in the wake of the victory from Yahweh, the secret of present and ultimate success is spelled out for us in 2 Chronicles 15 verse 2, and we mentioned this last night. It is this: as the prophet comes out, the Spirit of God came upon Azariah, it says in verse 1 of chapter 15, the son of Oded. He went out to meet Asa, and he said unto him, Hear me, Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin. Yahweh is with you while ye be with him. If ye seek him, he will be found of you. But if ye forsake him, he will forsake you. And that's what happens in the life of this man. He fails in his faith. He will not go to his God, and God has to leave him to die, tragically, as a man unrepentant. Verse 3, we read this: Now for a long season Israel hath been without the true God, and without a teaching priest, and without law. Yep, Israel, of course, is a reference to the fact that they were now a mixture of all the tribes who had come. They'd been without the true God under the leadership of former leaders. This word true God, of course, is emeth, the very word that God uses of his own character of stability and faithfulness and firmness and truth in Exodus 34 and verse 6. Being without law, of course, is that the focus of Israel was not upon God's law. There was no real teacher. There was no real teaching priest. And we're going to see when we come to the life of Jehoiada, the priest, that that's actually a reference to him. He happened to be 30 years of age when those words were spoken. Okay? And 30 years of age was the time when priests began their ministry. And Jehoiada the priest was emerging. And he was going to serve for 100 years as a priest in Israel or Judah. There he is, teaching priest The word teaching, yara, means to shoot arrows, as it were, to point people in the right direction. It has the idea of teaching in that regard. It is used in 2 Kings 12 verse 2 of Jehoiada, instructing, that's the word in the Hebrew, Joash. It is used in other places. It's rendered in Proverbs 11:25 as watered. In Hosea 10 verse 12 as rain. We get the idea of the teaching of the word of God. Jehoiada was about 30 or 31 years of age at that time. And priests began their service, of course, at 30 years of age. And the priest's lips, we are told in Malachi 2 verse 7, should keep knowledge, and they should seek the law at his mouth. King Asa promoted that, and Jehoshaphat, his son, promoted the instruction in God's law by the priests and the Levites. Now, look, I'm going over time here. Is that all right? I'll make it up for you a little bit later. Promise you. Yeah. Keep me to that. We do need just to have a quick look at this Reformation of Asa, if you're up to it. Have a look with me at 2 Chronicles 15 and verse 8. This is after the words of the prophet Azariah have been spoken to him. He's told in verse 7 to be strong and let his hands not be weak. And he initiates in verse 8 another purge of idolatry. So he goes around and he's taking out all the idolatry that could be identified. He repairs the altar of sacrifice. He's going to make offerings to Yahweh. The whole nation, in verse 9, is gathered together, and they come from all parts of Israel, from the entire 12 tribes. In verse 12, he enters into a covenant to seek Yahweh Elohim of their fathers with all their heart and with all their soul. There's Deuteronomy 6 verse 5. Okay? So what's the response to this? Verse 13, they lay down deadly sanctions for the unwilling. There's a bit of compulsion in that, isn't there? You don't stand to this covenant, we'll lop your head off. Well, it's not the best way to go about it. But what's the outcome? Well, look at it. Verse 14. And they swear unto Yahweh with a loud voice and with shouting and with trumpets and with cornets. And notice these words. Verse 15. And all Judah rejoiced at the oath, for they had sworn with all their heart and sought him with their whole desire, and he was found of them. In other words, they proved the words of the prophet in verse 2 to be correct. If you seek him, he will be found of you. They prove it to be correct. And Yahweh gave them rest roundabout. Okay? This is the greatest Reformation in Judah's history. You know why? Hezekiah's Reformation did not reach everyone. There were many people, like Shebna, digging their own grave. There were people on the housetops in the days of Hezekiah, weren't they? Proving that their Reformation hadn't been complete. Let us eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Yeah. This was the most complete and universal Reformation in Judah's history. The whole nation was involved. That is where this man ended up. And of course, the tragic story, when he puts the prophet of God who comes to him to tell him that he's failed in the matter of making the league with the king of Syria, he puts him in the prison house or the stocks, puts his feet there. And in this disease he sought not to Yahweh but to physicians. He went to self-help. He sought human help. But they made a very great burning for him, as we pointed out. He was deeply mourned by his long-suffering people out of respect for what he had done for them. So having a look at a chart, as we finish off this session, having a look at a chart of Judah's spiritual state. It was very low in the times of Rehoboam. There were some good things, it says, in Judah. When Asa comes to the throne, we have the greatest reformation in Judah's history. And even though he fails himself personally, the nation continues to serve their God. And under Jehoshaphat, his son, great things are achieved. But because Jehoshaphat makes his foolish alliance with the house of Ahab, things begin to fall away. But they're revived. You know why? Because in the days of King Asa, there was a man encouraged to be a teaching priest. His name was Jehoiada. Alright? And he guides King Joash. Joash fails, becomes an idolater. Uzziah brings the nation to another height. But then, of course, it falls away until the days of Hezekiah, who brings another spiritual revival to the nation. But Jehoiada, we're going to find, is a huge character in the scheme of things. Now, I just wanted to put this chart up. Jehoshaphat, the enigmatic educator. We're going to come back and have a look at him a bit closer in our next study, God willing. But you see, the reason he was like he was is because of 2 Chronicles 15 and verse 15. So let's finish on this point. 2 Chronicles 15 verse 15 says this: he was found of them, and Yahweh gave them rest round about. Guess who was watching? Guess who was watching? A little boy, a young man, Jehoshaphat. And he saw this great reformation of his father, and he determined that when he became king, he was going to be like his father in his first days. All right, that is the lesson that comes from the life of Asa. You can influence people for good, even though you might fail. You can influence them for good, and that can carry on for the benefit of others.
BibleTruthAndProphecy.com is a worldwide collaboration by Christadelphians to help promote the understanding of God's Word to those who are seeking the truth about the human condition and God's plan and purpose with this earth and with mankind upon it. Bible Truth and Prophecy is part of a wider set of online resources provided by Christadelphianvideo.org for establishing just how far removed the true Christian teaching of the first century apostles is from that taught by mainstream Christendom today. BibleTruthAndProphecy.com is very much a standalone website, but benefits from our vast network of sites and resources and social media. Here are just a few of the things that BibleTruthAndProphecy.com offers. We have a good number of written articles supplied to us from brothers from all over the globe. These deal with first principle issues, creation versus evolution, the inspiration of the Bible, and so much more. We have a whole section of video study series. These are studies that have been posted onto our YouTube channel, but because of the difficulty of the search feature within YouTube, we have chosen to host on Bible Truth and Prophecy. So now every video you search for within the site, you can be guaranteed that it will be of a Christadelphian nature. We also have a preaching video section where any ecclesia is invited to download and use or embed these videos within their own ecclesial websites. We also have an exhortation service where we produce 2 or 3 exhortations per week, which we then circulate to brethren and sisters in isolation. We also have an ever-growing list of approved Christadelphian sites. We also have a page of live news feeds, so you can keep up to date with all the breaking news as it happens. We also have a section for the daily readings. Each day at around midnight we publish all 3 of the daily readings, and then later on in the day we publish thought for the days, often based on all 3 portions of the daily readings. Within each daily reading post there is also a link to enable you to have the Bible chapter read to you directly. We also feature Bible in the News videos which we have produced from the Bible in the News website. We also feature Brother Don Pierce's milestone snippets, which come out approximately 3 times a week. We also feature Andy Walton's weekly World Watch and other commentaries and analysis from other brethren on world news events. You can also subscribe to the blog and be notified of posts as they happen in real time, and also subscribe to the weekly newsletter which is provided by Christadelphianvideo.org. Every page and post on the site has the facility to be able to leave a comment or make an observation, so please take advantage of this and let us know what you think of the site.